Hurricanes in the United States cause over an estimated $20 billion worth of damage every year, with hurricanes like Hurricane Irma leaving over 50,000 boats destroyed and completely worthless. This leaves boaters with only one question on their mind: how can we best protect ourselves against these kinds of damages when a hurricane or storm strikes? In today's episode, I'm joined by Scott Croft with Boat US, as well as Phil LeBlanc with Tow Boat, which responds to over 70,000 incidents every year before and after hurricanes, to talk about things like how to prepare your boat before a storm, as well as what happens to boats after a hurricane, like recovering them, abandoned, derelict vessels, and other recovery, and whether or not you can find a deal on a hurricane damaged storm, and some advice on what to do and what to protect yourself if you do find boats like this. So let's start off with Scott and give us some advice on what you can do to prepare your boat before a storm if you leave the boat in the water, ashore, or maybe on a boat lift, something like that. So, Scott, what are some things that people can do now to lessen the or prevent the damage of their boats going into hurricane season for boats that are, say, stored in the water, ashore, maybe on a boat lift, stuff like that? What do you think they can do?
The best advice I can say is do something. That's the big problem, is motivating people, understanding a hurricane's coming in. They have a lot of other things to do, worry about the family, worry about the property. But the biggest thing to do is to do something, and do something now. It starts long before a storm approaches the coast. And that's getting together the hurricane plan wherever you may be planning on putting your boat. Now, we've found through the years that the best way to reduce damage, the potential for damage, is to get the boat out of the water. So everybody listening, if you can get the boat out of the water from wherever it is, that is the number one thing you're going to do to reduce damage or reduce the chances for damage. But, we know that's not possible. That's not possible for everybody. Every marina can't haul every boat in time for a storm. So then look at how you're going to take your boat and protect it further, whether it's in a marina or a canal, whether it's on a boat lift, whether even when you take it out of the water, where you're going to put it away from trees. All these options should be based on your hurricane plan that if you have an insurance policy, your insurance company is going to want to know your hurricane plan. And by the way, if you don't follow your plan, some insurance companies may even exclude coverage. For instance, your hurricane plan, you said you're going to get your boat out of the water. It's not out of the water. You could be in trouble with your insurance company. So do something, get that plan together, whichever way that boat's going to, so many boats are different. Well, I can't get it out of a canal. It's going to have to be in my marina. I tell people, let's just start with the marina. Assess the marina. Is there a lot of scope? Is it prone to wave action and wind action? Those are the really trouble spots. But then all the other things behind it. Where's all the materials to protect that boat? The chafe protection, the extra lines. Does your marina have a hurricane club? Can you get a priority haul out? If you're not going to get a haul out, what is everybody else doing around you? I was talking to one of our claims folks guys, and he said it works better when everyone does something together. And I remember this lesson in Hurricane Ike. I was watching a salvage operation in a marina, and there was one boat that did not do anything. They left the boat tied up with all the windage. The sails were still on it, and that boat basically became a bowling ball and damaged every other boat down the marina lane when it became loose. And all those other people had done their protection. So again, what's your plan now before the storm comes in? How are you going to address it? Are you going to put the boat away from trees? Preferably store it on above the high water line, protected high water line. Canals, are you working together to spider web with your neighbors? How are you all going to, I can't tell you how many boats we've seen on canals. People tie them up. They don't do much to tie them up, and they end up on somebody's lawn or taken out a lanai or something like that, and they have damage. So, lifts, I'll finish up real quickly. Lifts are a troubled issue with a lot of boat owners in hurricanes, because you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. I go back to what I originally said. Don't leave it in the lift. Get it out of the water. Get it to high ground if you can. But if you can't, we found what a lot of folks do is just leave the boat in the lift. And a lot of boats in this last hurricane season just shifted as the water and the surge came up, and they got knocked around in the lift. The water went down, and now the boat fell out of the lift and is a total loss simply because it got jostled. So again, if you're in a lift, you may want to leave the plug in. You may, depending on the surge, and you should definitely secure it to the lift. All these kinds of things you should start thinking about now, and getting all the equipment together, the extra lines, and talking to your neighbors and talking to your marina or boat club.
Yeah, I like what you said there about having the working together as a community, because there's a lot of people think about all the snowbirds that are in Florida, that you got a home down there, you got a boat down there, you keep it on a lift, this, that, and the other, but maybe you spend the summers up north. Hurricane season's during the summertime when you're not there. So having that communication with, a neighbor or somebody that, I mean, even if you pay somebody, hey, I'm gonna pay you, a couple $100. You go get my boat. You take it to the marina. You pay for the hurricane thing. They take the boat out,
Mm-hmm.
and now you kind of like you're prepared there. It's like you said, it's the planning. Make sure you come up with a plan today, and then whenever a storm's coming in, all you do is you work your plan. You're not really, kind of
It's just implementing
coming
it.
up with it.
Right. You're not
Mhm.
starting from scratch. And what you just said a moment ago, that if the absentee owners, we saw a lot of that down in Southwest Florida, folks just aren't around all the time. Check your
Mhm.
insurance policy, because you may have a feature in that policy that helps move that boat, help assist to pay to move the boat either out of the water. I know our policies will pay up
Oh.
to $1,000 to haul the boat because we don't want to see any damage. But you can also potentially use that money for a captain to move that boat to a hurricane hole or other protective measures, especially if you're not in town.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That
Yep.
you think about insurance policies, it's like, yeah, I've heard the one where you got to get the boat out of the water or it will mess up, but then I've never heard of the one where it might have some coverage in there to haul the boat where they pay for the hauling block or whatever.
Absolutely.
I didn't hear that. That's good to know about
Short
that.
term, we call it hurricane haul out coverage. That's what people should be looking for.
And
Mm.
when it comes to policies, I think another thing people fail to note is many policies have either A, navigation limits, or B, layup periods. We've seen a
Mm.
number of cases where somebody under their policy is not allowed to be south of a certain line after a certain date. Coverage is then suspended because they voided that clause in their insurance policy. Or a lot of boats have a haul out clause or a layup clause by November 1st or November 15th. And certainly in the Northeast, we're known to get our nor'easters up here, which are similar to hurricanes. And we've seen coverage completely decline because that insurance policy did not cover in the water after November 1st.
Yeah. So just kind of knowing your policy if you have insurance, because if you don't have insurance, then the planning is even much more important because
Very much.
you got no coverage.
There's no backstop. You're the bank.
Yeah, yeah. So where would be a good place for people to find more? I mean, we've kind of covered the planning. Planning is the most important thing, obviously, but obviously there's a whole lot more meat left to talk about. So just kind of where would be a good place for people to go to find more information about how to plan, what to plan, that kind of stuff.
The easiest place to go to is boatus.com/hurricanes. This is the Boat US Hurricane website with all the hurricane planning information you could possibly need. We even have, like, I just looked at it this morning, a checklist you can print up, take to your boat, and it tells you, those kinds of storage options. If in a hurricane hole, if in a dock, are you keeping it at a moorage or an anchorage? All the equipment that you're going to need. This is a great little cheat sheet to download at boatus.com/hurricanes today and start thinking about that plan. Now we have a couple other things here that are much more detailed. We have a hurricane planning guide for boats and marinas. So boat clubs or marinas that are looking to protect their investment and their basins and all that, that's a free guide as well. We have the Boat US Magazine Hurricane Guide, which is sort of a story form about how people survived hurricanes protecting their boats. I really like that because it's not a military manual. You'll really understand the impact of what you can do to protect your boat by reading that. We also
Mm-hmm.
have a hurricane tracker, so if your boat is going to be in the 5-day cone and when you need to start implementing turn the switch on for that hurricane plan. Again, it's all about planning now and making it easy. We understand people could be evacuating. There's could be a lot of other things going on in a boat owner's life, but taking a little bit of time early in the process of a hurricane approaching, you're going to really mitigate a lot of potential damage that way. Now, I also say, hurricanes are acts of God, and hurricanes strike in many different ways. But again, going to the basics of getting your hurricane planning worksheet set up and what you're going to need for your situation, you're going to be way off better than anybody else. And here's the thing: you're going to be back boating sooner when the hurricane passes. You don't want to. You don't want to be dealing with repairs and all that work. So listen, it's you're saving your own headache and enjoying your own boating lifestyle with the minimal impact.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of damage. I mean, just probably the worst one was when Hurricane Irma came through in, I think it was 2017. And I mean, there's boats everywhere, but a lot of people have seen these after storm damages where the boats they're all over the place. They're all over the yards. They're all over everywhere. They're sunk at the docks. They're just strewn about the land or wherever you are, and it's pretty impressive. So what would be, I think, a good question would be for those people that do have insurance, because we'll kind of get into people that don't have insurance, but for people that do have insurance, what's something that they might need to know about their policy when it comes to the after the storm damage, the removal, the recovery, that kind of scenario? What's some things that they should probably need to know about?
Well, in your insurance policy, we already talked about the hurricane haul out coverage. So everybody should be checking to make sure you share the costs of preventing damage with your boat with your insurance company. You both have equal importance to do that. The next thing, and this is talking about boat insurance is the most boring thing in the world. I admit it. We've been an insurer for over 60 years. I've been the PR guy, and I try to make it really simple and basic. And that's check the pot. This is very basic language. What I call check the pot of money you have available for salvage and wreck removal. And what I mean is, many policies out there, there's two large flavors of policies. Agreed value is the largest. That's where you and your insurance company agree. I'm going to take the example. My boat's worth $50,000. So if there's a total loss, my boat I would be compensated that $50,000. But here's the kicker. How much now of that agreed value policy is available for salvage or wreck removal? And what we've found over the years is that number is much less than that full pot of $50,000. Now, our Geico marine insurance policies are a little different. We offer what I call the full pot, meaning you have up to $50,000 for salvage and wreck removal in addition to the whole liability. So what that basically means is you're not going to take money out of your pocket, out of that claims check, to salvage the boat. And I'll just finish with a quick story. Hurricane Ike, one of my first hurricane cat teams, there was a Boat US member, just a member, not an insured. He was walking down the dock with an insurance company check. It was a competitor. And he pointed to a stack of boats and he said, "I'm so happy. My insurance company paid me quickly." And I want to applaud the gentleman because that's what everybody wants. We've had people use our claims checks to live on because the delays in processing all their other claims. So that man had a check. But guess what? His insurance company told him it was his responsibility and his cost to move his boat out of a pickup sticks. Remember that game we used to play? The boats are in a pile and his is under here. He had no help. He had no assistance. So again, check that pot of money. If it is like 5% of the whole value, that could be a problem because you may end up paying out of pocket, especially for what we call a difficult pick. That's a boat that, like you were explaining, is a mile back into a sensitive area, very difficult to get heavy equipment, costs a lot of money to mobilize a salvage or wreck removal team. So again, make sure you have or are comfortable with the dollar value of salvage available in your policy, because that's when your policy, that's what you pay for. An insurance policy is the last backstop. When everything else goes wrong, make sure you got the right hull coverage and make sure you got the right salvage coverage on the policy as well. And we've seen people that don't. And for those boaters, this is another for those, about a little over half the recreational boats out there have an insurance policy, period. So there's lots of boats, as you mentioned before, that do not. This would be a time to maybe looking at an insurance policy for your boat, because those people are going to be doing it on their own and it's going to be out of their pocket.
Now, how does that work with the scenario you were talking about earlier about, so like, you did everything right? Like you did everything right, boats out of the water, all that kind of stuff. But another boat was not done, and now it comes through and wrecks through your boat, puts a hole through the side of the boat. And now you're kind of like, I guess that's probably in the policy of like, that would be considered what, floating debris or like, external damage.
Subrogation becomes the operative word here. Every insurer has a subrogation team, and their
Okay.
job is to look at who was at fault and go back to the other insurers and subrogate that risk and that bill back out to the responsible party. I also want to
Okay.
just jump in very quickly. I very much like Scott's way of simplifying the pot of money, but I think it's important to point out that really what we're talking about, the problematic policies or what are referred to as single limit policies. So if there is, for Scott's example, $50,000, that is the end of the pot of money. Liability, the recovery, the replacement of the boat, $50,000 is the total of the check that will be spent. So in addition to just removing the boat, let's take it a step further. Let's say the boat released a pollutant into the water. Now you have to have environmental cleanup. Let's say your vessel was the bowling ball that careened through the marina. Now what additional policy excesses do you have? Is your liability side higher, or do you have the available funds to you? Even if it were just a simple recovery, let's call it a $10,000 recovery to raise it from the bottom. That $10,000 comes out of your 50. I think it's important to note that every insurance policy has various sides to it. You have your marine general liability, you have your P&I, they all cover different things, and money can be taken from every side of that policy, whether it's injury, it's damage, it's environmental, it's replacement, it's recovery. They all have a place in the policy. The key that we always try and pass on to the people that ask us is find a true marine insurance policy. Everybody in the world now can put a boat on a policy. Whether or not it's a good policy is the operative question. And there are companies out there, Geico being one and a number of others, that specialize in marine. They know the forms they're writing. The underwriters understand the risk. The coverages that they offer are adequate for what we experience on the water. The problem you run into is when someone has an insurer that does not specialize in marine. I won't call out any names. What I'll say is, one of the general sayings in our industry is you may be in good hands, but we're going to need a credit card anyway. There are some insurers that do not specialize in marine. One of the largest insurers of boats in this country is not a marine insurer. They have the largest numbers of vessels on policies. They do not hold the largest number of marine policies. And there is a very, very big difference in the marine world. So go and shop your policies. Understand what you're being offered. The protections you get listing your boat under your homeowner's policy are vastly different than the protections you get listing that vessel individually under a marine policy. 30 minutes of searching on the interwebs will tell you an awful lot about who is a good insurer and who is not for marine. Don't just shop the dollars, and do your very best not to try to attach your vessel to existing policies, because you will find out at the very worst time that you lack adequate cover.
Good point.
Yeah, it's kind of like what people in California are dealing with. Same thing with the fires. Like you're saying, that pot is the pot. Like the number is the number, and unless it's stated somewhere in there, like if you got 50 grand, you got 50 grand. Well, if 10 of that goes to getting rid of the boat, and then 20 goes to fixing anything, whatever happened on the other, you're left with 20 grand. So, and then like you're saying, like I just said with the fires, like, what if the insurance company runs out of money? And now all of a sudden, one hurricane goes through, the damage can be just exponentially massive over
It's industry
large
changing.
areas.
We have seen that.
And the insurance company has too many policies out there, and they all take the money. And now all of a sudden that, who's left holding the bag, like it. So I can totally understand that. All right, then here's a scenario. So, like you're saying, the boat, let's say the boat is not, in water, but let's say it floats on and gets into somebody's house. Like it's on some private property. Maybe it does some damage to a lanai, or let's say the boat floats from the water onto someone's property and sits in their pool, and now is submerged in their pool. So to get that boat out of there, how does that, process work? And like, do you got to pay for the guy's pool, or like, how's this work here?
I'll let Phil handle that one.
You want me to jump into that one? You want to speak
You've
policies?
lived this, Phil, so many
So
times.
it goes back to what I said, having the correct policy. So if you've got, let's say, for instance, your vessel listed under a homeowner's and it's a liability only coverage, it is going to cover liability only. It may pay some of the cost to that individual and the damage they incurred. And note that I said some of the costs to that
Mm.
individual. It is not going to pay for the recovery. It is not going to pay for the replacement. It may pay for some of the environmental. Now you've got to worry as the operator, how am I going to get in there? So in order to get that boat, I probably need to bring in a crane. Can I bring a
Mm-hmm.
crane into the backyard? We've seen that problem where we have these enormous storm surges. A 40 or 50-foot boat is 200 yards inland in the middle of someone's yard. The only way to get it off is with a crane. You can't pick far enough from a barge because it's just too far out. There's no
Mm-hmm.
room between the house in order to get the crane in, because now you're going to need a 200-ton crane to make that lift. You're not going to pick it up and over the house and back out. This is where the policies become important. So if you've got a true marine policy, the hull section of that policy is going to cover your vessel and the loss of the vessel. It is likely going to pay for the recovery of the vessel. And to note, the recovery does not necessarily need to be limited to the value of the vessel. There are international treaties in place that talk about how that works and how things are paid. You can exceed the value of the vessel. We see it all the time when you've got a boat that may be insured for $1,500 that is in a very precarious position. Nobody in their right mind is going to devote 3 days to recover the boat for $1,500.
Right.
Then you have the P&I section, you have the liability section. In a true marine policy, there are 4 or 5 pots of money distributed throughout that entire policy, all of which can be drawn from. So if you've got a true marine policy with a true insurer that has the right coverages, everything will be covered from top to bottom. If you don't have that, you're going to be liable for the amount of money that will bankrupt the average family. We are talking
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to the pool, the structure, the home, the lawn, the recovery, the replacement of the boat. The list goes on. And I can assure you, having been there and done that after a storm, everybody is going to be there with their hands out. Take my
Oh
word
yeah.
for it. Whether it's the people there to do the work or the people there to collect whatever they can, they come flooding into those areas, and everybody is looking to pick your pocket. There is no doubt about it. You've got to have the right coverage. I cannot stress that enough. One of the first questions that my dispatchers ask is, are you insured and who are you insured with? Because in order to protect the customer and ourselves, the answer will very much determine how we move forward and how this is done, because we may need to actually take a step back so as not to put the customer in a bad position or anybody else in a bad position, simply because nobody has the proper cover.
Yeah, because you kind of, as the people that have to recover that, and maybe we can go into that actually, but the guy that's actually got to go back there, get his crane out, get his tools out, get his stuff out, go get the boat, like he's going to want to get paid before he even drives over there, because it, like you said, this could be a 3, 4, 5 day operation to get this boat out of this area. I mean, they might have to cut the thing up. I
I
mean,
was going to
it
say
might
that
be
has been done in the past. We have brought in 40-yard dumpsters and a chainsaw and cut things up in place because that was just the easiest, most efficient, most cost-effective way to do it. Storms do incredible things with boats. I think there's still 2 missing in the mangroves down on the West Coast. One they've spotted with a helicopter, it can't come out, and one that's just gone back there. They saw it moving somewhere during the storm and forget it, it's gone. It's incredible what water will do. So you bring all of these people in, they're going to want to be paid. Then you're going to have to start talking to your insurer or to yourself about what insurance coverages they have. Now, a 200-ton crane is lifting a boat over the top of a $1.2 million home. What if the boat goes through the roof? There are so many moving pieces and so many liabilities, direct and vicarious, that it's impossible to count them all.
Yeah, I just want to second the insurance, how important having a good insurer. It's just like there's a million roofers show up after a hurricane. Well, there's a million folks with a pickup truck going to come along, and they say, well, I can take your boat for this much, no problem.
Yeah.
But what Phil's speaking to are truly professional experts in salvage and wreck removal, and having the insurance company run this. It's interference. It's guiding. It's leading to the outcome that everybody agrees upon. To do that alone after a hurricane is a real mess. And I've always taught, it's a game of triage. When a storm hits, the first thing to do, and sometimes the hardest thing to do, and Phil was mentioning this, is where are the boats? Is it that boat far back there? And what condition is that boat in? Is it causing additional pollution? Is it holding up the corner roof of a house? We've seen
Is it in the house?
all I remember we had a boat in a hurricane, a bass boat in a living room, took out the whole side of the house, and it was sitting in front of the television set. It's just unbelievable what nature can do and leave you with the boat. But I'll just finish just saying, it's your insurance company. A good insurance company is going to be your friend and take care of you. And that's what you really need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that circles back as well. It may come up later, but I think it plays into this conversation. A good insurer is also your guide through a lot of this. One of the first things we will tell the boater is you need to contact your insurance company for two reasons. Number one, you need to establish the notice of claim so they can start the process working. Maybe three reasons. Number two, you need to protect yourself. Under most policies, you have a duty to maintain the value of the vessel. That is incumbent upon you as the boat owner and policyholder. And number three, they can direct you as to what is going to happen next. You put the onus back on your insurer to tell you how they want those steps to be taken. Because if you start taking improper steps, again, that could leave you in a difficult position of lacking cover because you voided sub-warranty or some part of your policy. Get the adjusters involved almost immediately, especially if it's an insurer that likes to send down surveyors. Let them take care of it, especially in a storm. If you've got a pile of 60 boats and yours is number 58, you can't be pushing the other 57 aside to get to yours. It's all part of a process. Even just a standard day by day. Most people, and I understand it, we live in the insurance world. I'm not an insurer, but I have to deal with it every single day. Most people don't understand those policies. They just assume I bought insurance, it must be good. There are various levels of insurance. There are various coverages, especially nowadays when people are able to choose from a menu of coverages. Let the adjuster, let the insurance company tell you what your coverage is and what your next step should be. That protects the insurer, it protects your property, and most importantly, it protects you as the policyholder and the boat owner.
Yeah. What are some examples? I mean, you guys have probably seen all kinds of stuff. What's some of the craziest stuff you've seen as far as like where a boat's been? Like, I mean, obviously getting your bass cat in the living room in front of the TV is probably, the guy's like, oh man, I got a new Ranger in here. Like it's probably one of them.
I'll leave it to I have a couple, but Phil has some doozies. I know.
Oh, gosh, where do I start? Here's the problem with having done this job for 28 years is they all start running together.
Yeah.
People say, what's the craziest thing you've seen? You're like, where do I even start? Like, I don't know. I think one of my favorite was actually a boat that rolled up in a storm. And we have a little seaside village here in Wickford, Rhode Island. Old style houses built in the 1700s, small salt boxes that are really only 15 or 20 feet apart. And when Hurricane Bob rolled through, I believe it was Bob many years ago, it picked a boat up and sent it between two houses. And when I say it sat it down between the two houses with 8 inches to spare on either side, pointed right back out toward the water and never touched the houses. It looked like the hand of God gently lifted up the boat and just placed it. But now you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, okay, so it's 9 feet up a seawall. It's got to come across rocks. I've got to get it out of there without touching the houses, and I've got to try and preserve the value. I can't strap it because I can't get around the boat. I can't lift it because I can't put spreaders between the house because they're too close together. I can't reach it from a barge. How do we wiggle? Mother Nature did something that was physically impossible. How do we get it back out without doing more damage that was caused in the first place?
Yeah. That reminds me of Narcosis. I was not on this particular team, but there was a 60-foot power vessel, Narcosis. Just take what Phil's story does, but replace it with a 65-foot yacht. And you were talking earlier about, that has to be lifted over a $2 million house and all the permits, and how are you going to get that crane in there? And it goes down in infamy in our catastrophe division here about how they got that boat out without causing a scratch, any additional damage to the boat. That's, folks like Phil with our towboat US team that are routinely called out to salvage vessels. These guys have been doing it for years, and they really know how to do it right. And finding that person, to get it done is usually going to come through your insurance company, and they're going to have professional help.
Okay. All right. So then let's kind of walk through like a normal operation then, like a normal recovery. Let's just say it's a normal recovery. The boat's, whatever, if it's sunk in the canal or if it's on the land, what's a normal operation look like from getting that boat? And then, where do the boats go? Where do you take them and all that kind of stuff? How's it normally supposed to go?
You want me to jump in here, Scott? Or you want to? Okay. So, I mean, essentially, we're the first line typically. Sometimes they will go over to the Geico dispatching center, which is Scott's side of the operation. Most of the time, it comes directly to our phone number here at our local dispatch. So we answer our phones live 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We've invested a lot of time and money in that digital infrastructure, voice over IP phones, apps, you name it. There is never a chance or an opportunity for that phone not to be answered by a live local human being. So
Mm,
the call comes in, my dispatchers will take the call. Soon as somebody says they need help, they will immediately start the triage, the big five. Is everybody safe? What's going on? Is the boat anchored? They'll tell us the boat sunk at such and such. Okay. Who is the insurer? Where is the boat? They start gathering all the information. Say it's a 25-foot Grady White. It's insured by insurance company XYZ. Not a problem. They will start rolling our guys, at least one person in a boat to get up there and get eyes on, assuming it's not emergent. If someone calls and says, I'm taking on water now, we dispense with the
hmm.
questions and we send every asset we've got. But for the sake of
Right.
this, we'll say it's already sunk at the dock.
Yeah.
Someone will get headed in that direction. We will dispatch at least one vessel and one person out there. In the meantime, my dispatchers will start asking for questions so we know what we're going to encounter when we get there. Because at this point, we really want to get it up out of the water. Environmental pollutants are a problem. Bringing down the dock, bringing down the pilings, all of that becomes a concern. We'll get the photos. Typically, they come to me. I'm the guy that oversees everything. I'll see a 25-foot Grady still attached to the dock, partially flipped over. So now I start working my end. I have someone headed up there in a boat. He's going to start getting the marina prepped for what's coming. Somebody else will grab a fully stocked salvage trailer that has all of our lift bags, our pumps, our come-alongs, our chains, our you name it, it comes up in that trailer. Probably send one or at least one more boat up there, someone with the trailer to move up. All of our guys are certified to dive. We dive from the boat. They'll get up there. In the meantime, we've talked to the insurance company. Depending on who the insurer is, the insurance company, again, a good marine insurer will have a 24-hour claims line. They've already
Mm,
gotten someone on the line. They've established the first notice of claim. If we have time, we like to talk to that adjuster, determine what the cost is going to be ahead of time. It's a very easy and simple way to maintain trust with the insurers, maintain trust with the customer. Everybody knows what they're getting into, so there's no surprises later. We establish that. That's a very simple process. Typically, an email comes back to us. This is what we've agreed to. My guys will get there depending on the situation. We'll talk about the Grady. I'll have divers in the water. They're attaching lift bags. The boat is lifted up to the surface. We pump the boat out, make sure it's dry, make sure it's not taking on any other water, immediately to a haul out for the vessel. Because remember what I mentioned earlier, you do have a duty to preserve the value of the property. It is
mm-hmm.
absolutely imperative that within that first 24 hours, and I'm sure you know this, we have a flush and pickle of the engines. That is
Mm-hmm.
really your only chance to maintain the integrity of those engines and make sure they survive. Because after 24 hours, corrosion starts
Yeah.
taking over and you might as well throw them in the trash. We've
Mm-hmm.
actually had people when we did not have the ability for a haul out, depending on where the boat was, how the boat was situated. We will actually leave the boat in the water sometimes until the next morning because it's much safer sitting where it is, knowing we
Mm-hmm.
can get a haul out and service the next day. And that's very strange to people when we say we're not going to move this until tomorrow. They're very emotional. Their boat's sunk. It needs to come out right now, but we have to convince them that's not always the best choice.
Mm-hmm.
Get the boat out of the water, regardless of whether or not it's going to be a constructive total loss later down the road. We want to make sure that engine is flushed and pickled because even if it is totaled and you receive a check for the boat, that boat is going somewhere else. It's going to a Copar, a Cooper Capital, someone of that nature who is then going to auction or wholesale that boat. The more value you can retain, the more money they're going to get for it, the more money the insurance company gets back to offset your claim. Our aim is always to make it as stress-free and easy as possible. people hear the word salvage, and I've spent over 25 years with this. It is not the scary, life-altering, we're going to take your vessel stories you have read about in the boating rags. I can assure you, as someone who runs one of these companies with 6 towboats, and my 13-year-old kid has like 4 Boston Whalers, I have more boats than I know what to do with. I don't want your boat. I don't need your boat. We want to try and make this very easy. We want the customer experience to be excellent, so that next time they have an emergency, they're not afraid to call us. Because next time they have an emergency, there could be a lot more on the line than just a boat. We want them to have trust in us and to call us. We will educate them about what they're going to experience with their insurance company. We hand over our business card and tell them if they have any questions, call us. We deal with this each and every day. We're happy to walk you through this. But we will take the steps necessary, A, to recover the boat, B, to make them comfortable in the situation, and C, to help them understand the parts of the policy that we see every day that they may only see once in a lifetime, so that they remain boaters. One of our biggest fears is that if someone loses a boat, they're out of boating. That is a loss of a lifestyle. That's a loss of something we all love. And it's a loss of a potential customer down the road with everything that we do, not just for us, but the marinas, the chandleries, the repair yards. We want to make this as easy as possible so they remain boaters, they remain comfortable on the water, and we can maintain our reputation for being honest and among the best in the business.
Yep. And just, I was going to say the 2 pipelines that Phil is really talking about is salvage and wreck removal. Those are your destinations. Salvage basically means there's enough value left in the boat to be repaired, meaning the policy coverage will take care of repairs and not exceed it. And I know Phil can get a little bit better on this than I can. But wreck removal is exactly what it means. The cost to repair is exceeding the value of that policy. It makes no sense. You know, I've seen people after hurricanes and the boat looks fine and it's on a yard or something like that for sale. And people will go, oh, well, why did they call that a CTL or a constructive total loss? The reality is that boat was probably submerged all the way up to the deck top, you know, and to repair all the soft goods, all the wiring, get those engines back in order, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And that's where, you know, people will, Copar and all these other firms will auction them off to not for the faint of heart, mind you. But, you know, it's really those 2 pathways and having that help. What Phil just said is most of it's being done without the owner having to do much other than monitor and learn and understand and work with their insurance company to know what's happening. But the hard work, it's being done by the salvage and wreck removal teams, the technical expertise. Can you get a land crane a mile back into the bayou? All these highly, you know, it's almost like a Rube Goldberg kind of like contraption. How do we get this boat into one of those salvage or wreck removal and get that boat owner whole again as quickly as possible?
Yeah, we're pretty heavy on the insurance. So one question though that I'm thinking about is, like you said, there's over 50% of the boats out there are not insured. So as the recovery company, what do you do when you get there and you find out that the boat has no insurance? Like, I mean, obviously you're not going to go through all this work, all this trouble, get all your stuff out, get all your gear out. You got 6 guys doing all kinds of different stuff. Like, what happens in that process if that boat that you show up is not insured, not life threatening? Like, obviously, like you're saying, Phil, if, you know, you get somewhere and the boat's sinking, you got people on it, like, you know, you guys go, you take care of it. You save the life.
We save the life and the property and figure out the problems later. Exactly. That's always, you know, I try to explain that to people is it doesn't matter what your status is. We're all boaters. We're all members of the same community. Someone yells Mayday, everybody's coming. Everybody's coming regardless of coverage. And I think that's a really important point to get out there.
Yeah.
As far as if the boat is not insured, these are the times when I say that it's not so much fun being the boss, because these are the hard decisions you've got to make that I don't know if they have a right or a wrong answer, but it's definitely not an easy answer.
Yeah.
This becomes the time when I have to make a judgment call of risk versus reward. What needs to be put into this job? Number 1, in man hours. Number 2, in time. Number 3, in equipment. But most importantly, in liability. And if this is just a small boat that's simply sunk that we can spend a few hours on with a couple of guys and we're very confident we can get it up, we can get it moved, that's fine. We'll reach the same agreement with the boat owner as we do with the insurance company. We try and tell them ahead of time, this is what it's going to cost. Anything that falls outside the scope of that, when I don't know what's going to be involved, we call them time and materials contracts, where everything is itemized on the contract. And I'll use those frequently when we're looking at a situation saying this could be 2 hours, this could be 20 hours. We're just not going to know until we get the boat halfway up and see how big the holes are in the bottom, how much of the structure is missing. And in situations like that, we are very hesitant to take on the work because I don't know if it's going to be 4 days of work that honestly the customer cannot afford. And I'm very straightforward with that. It's not judgmental. I have a young family. We're trying to support a business. We are certainly not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. So if I lost a $25,000 boat and 5 days later someone handed me a $60,000 bill, I would be insolvent very, very quickly. You never want to put anyone in that position. We're very upfront with them. We do have other people, third parties, that they do this kind of as a sideline, so to speak, dock building companies that have some capabilities. They're not going to be as clean as us. They're not going to be as quick as us, but they do have some equipment they can bring to bear, and they can probably do it with less overhead than I have. But we're going to try and work that through with the customer to determine what has to be done to the boat, what financial obligation is there going to be. I never want to turn them away with no options, but I also don't want to undertake an operation that could potentially hurt our equipment, hurt our people, and financially hurt the customer.
Right. Cool. So, I mean, that pretty much makes sense. I don't really have any more to add to it or subtract for it. That's pretty clean cut and dry. I think that was well spoken. That was a good speech.
I always I have to explain this a lot of times to my dispatchers. We are in the business of wanting to help people. That's why we all got into this. That's why we do it. That's the gratification in large part. We don't want someone to be hurt in any way, shape, or form. We're all part of this community, especially in these little communities we live in. As far as myself up, and we've got a very small area in Rhode Island. It's a big bay, but it's a very small state. We never want to be in a position where we are hurting a fellow boater. We want to be able to help people. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're A, taking care of our customer, B, taking care of our business, and C, most importantly, I've got to be able to sleep at night. Scott will tell you that I've said multiple times from the podium, integrity is my watchword. And there are times I will walk away knowing that I could make a barrel full of money off of somebody, but it's just not right. Do I want somebody to max out their credit card and carry 10 years worth of debt so that I can have an extra special steak dinner the following night? Nothing is worth that in the long run. So you've just got to take each situation as it comes. This is a very dynamic business. I've been doing it 28 years and nothing has ever been exactly the same. But in the end, we've been here 28 years. We're going to be here 28 more because we communicate with our customers and we're honest and we have integrity.
What happens to the boats if they're like, let's say the boat's not salvageable and the owner doesn't want it? What happens in that situation?
Are we talking in the water or on land? Because they're very different answers.
Can we do both?
Sure. So depending on the boat, so in the water, there are, and believe it or not, this actually came up in the Coast Guard Authorization Act just about a month ago as it went through Congress. The Coast Guard has finally been given some statutory authority on what they call derelict vessels. And essentially, if the boat is sunk or lacks value and the owner has walked away, that's what it becomes, as a derelict vessel. So the Coast Guard federally has been given the authority to designate something as a derelict vessel, so that something needs to be done with it. The downside is that every state is different because then it comes back to state law. The Coast Guard has the authority to designate it as a derelict vessel, but there's no teeth. There's no enforcement power for the Coast Guard. Each state is different. Florida, for instance, because they have dealt with so many hurricanes over the years, has a phenomenal program for derelict vessels. They understand how to handle them after storms. They have money put aside. They have a dedicated part of their state government that handles all of that. They have enforcement authority. Everything is very well laid out because they have to deal with it all the time. Rhode Island, on the other hand, we take a certain percentage from every boat registration and it goes into a derelict boat fund. We then get a call from the Department of Environmental Management, who's our on the water law enforcement on a state level. They have designated it as a derelict vessel. They will now pay out of that fund to have the boat removed. Then there are other states who have no idea what to do with it. It sits there for years until a volunteer, such as some of our Towboat US guys, step up and do it out of the goodness of their heart for the community, because there's no enforcement, there's no legislative action, and there's no money available for that. Once it's on land, again, it's very much state determined. You have a lot of states that are tidal states like Rhode Island. Marinas have an awful hard time if they're trying to clear out space in their lot. an owner may have abandoned the vessel and walked away, but because the
Mm-hmm.
marina doesn't hold the title of that boat, there is legally nothing they can do with it. They have to spend $20,000-$30,000 in federal court to sue the vessel, obtain the title, just to spend another $5,000 to dispose of it. It becomes an environmental problem, and ultimately it ends up being borne by the taxpayers, both federally and in the states, to try and do away with those boats. And it's becoming a bigger problem nowadays. What we found was during the pandemic, I joked that anything that had been in somebody's backyard for 10 years probably sold on Facebook Marketplace. There was a lot of boats out there floating around that probably should not have been floating around. And a lot of those were abandoned after everything kind of settled back down. So we're seeing nationwide a big problem with derelict vessels. And I think that's probably why the legislature allowed the Coast Guard to have some statutory authority over that. But I think you're going to see probably more of it for the next few years until they really get their arms around it.
You would think that would go back to the whoever titled it last, because it's kind of like, you know, whatever. Like I've got a car, the car's messed up. I take it to Walmart, I park it, I leave. Like, it's like you would think there's some repercussions to that. It's similar to like you got your boat, it's all messed up, it won't work. You take it somewhere, you dump it. Like, now all of a sudden here's this derelict vessel that you dump somewhere. You would think that would go back to whoever owned the boat previously and that they would have to pay. But I guess that kind of like, can you just abandon a boat like that? Or like what?
Federally, you can't. Statewide, you can't. There are hazardous navigation laws or environmental laws. There's a lot in play. I can tell you firsthand, having dealt with this a number of times, because these transactions are typically low dollar, they're cash transactions, they're going person to person. As your state authorities are tracking down titling, either A, the title goes back to a different state, or B, it goes back 3 or 4 owners. You've got this guy that sold the boat in 1998 that's looking at you going, why am I on the hook for $30,000? And it has gone multiple times. You get a lot of people that are, they've got good intentions and a dream. And we see them all the time where they buy a boat up here for a couple of $1,000s in cash, and they're going to sail it down to Florida, and that's where they're going to live. Typically they make it about 4 miles before they figure out some of their life choices. Where do you go with it? And is it worth it to the state to spend all of the time and the energy and the money and the manpower? That could be tens of thousands of dollars versus just paying someone $5,000 to do away with the boat and walking away from it.
Yeah, there's a really big case right now in Milwaukee. Any boater's been following it. There was a vessel that was sold. The new owners tried to navigate from the Great Lakes to the south. The boat didn't get past the breakwater in Milwaukee. It's been sitting there. The latest thing we've heard is sort of relating to what Phil said about the ownership chain of ownership. We believe that the county government now is going after the person who sold the boat because they were indeed the last owner, the official owner. The new owner did not register it. That's a whole nother thing about buying and selling a boat and making sure the paperwork and transaction is done, proper. But a lot of states don't have what we call damaged or salvage titles like cars. So, Florida does. I believe Texas is about to sign into law. I believe there's 2 other states. I don't quote me. I want to say Mississippi, Louisiana, but there's barely a handful of states that brand a title as a salvage. So what people will also often do is sometimes they'll move the boat out of state, bring it through a state that washes away that damaged title, and now try to sell the boat as something that it's not. But the abandoned derelict vessel issue is definitely increasing because we have severity and increasing number of storms. We have, unfortunately, I think in this country, a challenge with some people who choose to buy a vessel for housing solutions, and they are poorly maintained. They are merely meant not to navigate. I wouldn't call those kinds of owners responsible recreational boaters. And unfortunately, that casts a negative light on the rest of the almost 12 million registered vessel owners in this country. But the problem with abandoned derelict vessels is getting worse. We're starting to do more, but we'll get into that later. But the idea of how a boat starts from a storm in its condition and then gets to wherever it's going, it has so many pathways. But you got help. You got your insurance company to help you.
Mm. Okay, then let's go back to the ones that let's say they're on land, but it's not worth the owner. You know who the owner is. What happens to that boat? They or well, actually, hold on before we do that. What the derelict vessels? Let's say it is derelict. They come get it. What do they do with it? Is it just go to a? They just cut it up, go to a junkyard? Like what happens there?
Yeah, typically it's just disposed of. It's cut up. They put it in a dumpster and they take it to a receiving facility that's willing to take it. Even that's becoming more difficult just because of the fiberglass, the heavy metals, the
Mm.
oils, things of that nature. But you're starting to see that the states are just doing away with them. They don't want them to come back. Once it's off their radar and it's
Yeah.
out of the water, off the land, they never want to see that boat ever again. And they're happy
Yeah.
to pay for that pleasure.
And at Boat US, we're not happy with that solution either. You know, it's something we share that with the wind industry and the issue of fiberglass turbines. Our Boat US Foundation, which is the nonprofit side to Boat US, received a $10 million grant from NOAA to exactly look at the abandoned derelict vessel issue and what we can do to to adjust what we call the marine waste stream. These with
Mm.
recreational boats being at the top of it, but there's other things like flares and other issues related to that waste
Yeah.
stream. And we're trying to look at, first of all, educating the folks in the industry. We had a big conference about 2 months ago called Turning the Tide, where we had 40 discussions about what individual states are doing with these vessels, what can be done, and trying to get them to partner with each other. The next step we're doing is we're about to announce a project that's going to remediate about 400 abandoned derelict vessels through that NOAA grant and the foundation. We created a database, the first ever database, nationwide database of abandoned derelict vessels on the coasts and the Great Lakes. We haven't gone inland yet, but that's where we're headed. And merely knowing where these boats are is the first step of how to address them. And then working with all those individual states and their individual state laws. Some like like Phil was saying, they may have an abandoned derelict vessel program. It may not have a lot of money. You know, what can we do with these boats? Because we know putting them in a landfill is probably not the best thing for the environment. And as boaters, we all, you know, we swim, we fish in the water,
Mm-hmm.
we want our environment really great for everybody. Are there solutions? Can you take that fiberglass and turn it into a product that may be reusable, perhaps in cement processing? Right now, there's hope that it can, but the financial model isn't quite there yet. So we have to start definitely addressing it head on because it's I've been in this industry for 25 years. I'm on the Hudson River. I boat all across the east coast, and I've seen this problem firsthand go up. So we got to do something.
Okay, then let's go back then onto the ones that are on land, and let's say the owner doesn't want it, but it's not a cut up and send to the junkyard. What happens with those boats?
I think again, it comes back to the state that you're in, and every state is different as far as how it needs to be advertised, how the title needs to be transferred. You've got your federal limitations of suing a vessel in order to obtain it, which is one whole
Mm-hmm.
process. And then you've got your state process. Some states are very simple. You don't require a title. You simply bring a suit in state court against the vessel, which is called in rem. You sue the vessel, you post the vessel for a certain number of days in a local publication. And as long as you follow through with that, nobody claims it, you end up with the boat. In a
Mm.
state like Rhode Island, you can't do that. Whoever held the title last still owns the boat regardless. So it becomes a much more onerous step by step process. I know we had a very high profile local boatyard about 5 years ago wanted to expand their land, and they had half a dozen boats, and it was over $100,000 in a year of litigation in order to obtain the titles for those boats. So it's really
Wow.
state by state dependent, and it is in a lot of states not an easy process.
So sidebar, if you're selling a boat, you may want to contact your state's DMV. That's a new tip we've learned at Boat US. You know, you certainly want that title processed quickly if it's a title state,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always a good idea. We have more information on buying and selling at boatus.com, including a buying and selling guide. But now we're telling, because of what Phil just said, when you sell a boat, you should call your state agency, your DMV, and let them know you are no longer owner of the boat.
Yeah, I've actually had to deal with that same situation there. I was telling Scott this. I didn't tell you this, Phil, but I did the same thing. I had a boat, sold it, he gave me the cash, signed the title. He's supposed to go to DMV. And it was a 25 pursuit with a cuddy cabin down in the Florida Keys. Guy took it on a Friday and he didn't go to the DMV. Instead, he went to Key West, filled it up with fuel, then took it to Cuba, picked up a bunch of stuff, and was on his way back on that weekend. On Monday, I got a call from the DEA, and the DEA is like, "Hey, we're calling about your boat. We picked it up. We got it at the I forget the border Coast Guard station or something in Key West." And like he's like looking at me like I own this boat, and it's like, I don't know what they got picked up for. Were they transporting people? Was it drugs? Like, what's going on here? I'm like, they're like, we are going to come pick up your boat. I'm like, no, I don't want anything to do with that boat.
You can't say "not me" loudly enough, fast enough, or frequently enough.
Yeah, I'm like when the DEA calls, it's kind of like, no. I ain't got nothing to do with this. Like
that is one call I'm happy to say I have never answered.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very important that the state knows that you don't own that boat anymore if you sell it.
Yep.
That's too funny. So then, what would you say are some environmental issues that you kind of have to tackle when it comes to taking a boat out? Like, I mean, obviously the private property damage, you got to drive a crane into someone's yard, like you're tearing up the landscaping. But what about some other things that people might not think about as far as like, environmental risks go?
Well, I think first and foremost, you've got to look at your federal and state law. Any discoloration on the surface of the water requires a report. And as soon as you report it and the Coast Guard Marine Safety Officers show up and your state environmental agencies show up, that's a whole new game. If you want to see an owner have to move very quickly, that's how you do it. Lots of people in uniforms. We are lucky here in that our DEM, which is, I guess, most other states would call it a DNR, they are very good. They have their own crew that will come down and assist with the cleanup. They provide the product. They will give us the barrels. They will handle the disposal for us. Makes our life a lot easier not having to deal with that. But just think of what you've got coming up to the surface of the water, especially if you've got to put divers in it. You've got gasoline, you've got diesel, you've got whatever came out of the marine sanitation device. There are a lot of, I think, issues people don't think of. All they think about is the lube oil in the engine. I can assure you, when my divers are getting in the water, they are intimately aware of everything that's leaking out of that vessel, and it's a problem. And a lot of states have very harsh legislation on the books for what will happen if you do not take immediate action on that. I mean, my state can fine up to $30,000 a day for ongoing pollution. They don't like to pull that trigger, but they can certainly wield it as a weapon if they want action very quickly.
That's one of those. I'm going to go back to the pots of money. There is pollution coverage for marine insurance policies. You should have the maximum, which I believe is around $1 million today. Heaven forbid you're in a marine protected area and you run up on coral. Everything just gets magnified. And everything that Phil said times 6. It's just going to get crazier and crazier. So make sure that policy has that pollution coverage as well. A lot of homeowners, if you're putting your boat on your homeowners, probably doesn't.
Also, look at Florida. We're talking about pollutants released into the water. And when you look at environmental and ecological, run up into the protected seagrass areas in Florida and see the bills that start coming down on you because your hull dug a channel 30 yards into the protected seagrass. Then look at the guy who has to recover it, who they're telling you cannot damage any more seagrass. There needs to be people on site. Marine mammals are becoming a big issue up here. What are we doing that are affecting the marine mammals?